So welcome back to the podcast. I'm Rain Giorgio, founder of NerdNest, and my guest today is...
Faith Lehrheimer, avid fan of NerdNest and certified beta tester.
She is indeed one of our certified beta testers, one of the people who helped get it off the ground and make it something with a lot of really great feedback to make it A+ for your future use. So, Today we're going to talk about the Shakespeare Fandom, one of the oldest and most passionate fandoms that is still alive today. That and like the Merlin fandom really are pretty much the oldest that I can think of.
Yeah, I haven't watched Merlin yet, but that's something I need to get into.
Yeah, it's a lot of shipping goodness in that one too. Yeah. Merthyr is, most people would argue, practically canon.
This is one of those ships that I kind of am on board with, although I've never seen the show.
Yeah, just osmosis through other media types.
Yeah, it just happened. You see enough gifs and you're like, alright.
Yeah.
I'm canon as far as I'm concerned.
I ship it.
I still haven't seen the show, but when I get there, I'm sure I'll ship it.
Yeah, exactly. I shipped it before I watched the show, and then it just cemented in my heart forever.
One of my friends has actually asked me to watch Teen Wolf because she's convinced that I'll really ship, who is it, Styles and Derek? Mm-hmm. She's really convinced that I'll ship them, and she's like, I just want you to watch it and then send me all your shipping messages. Because it seems like you get really attached to your ships. And I was like, oh, does it? How would you think that? How would you know?
Well, thank you. I have a friend who also wants me to get into Teen Wolf because she has no one else who's read the same fan fiction as her. It's hysteric fic, and it's a mega one with something like 200,000 plus words. And sometimes you just gotta watch a show for the fics.
It's true. It's true, because there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of it. And sometimes it goes mainstream, like Shakespeare fan fiction.
Yes.
Which has been mainstream for a very long time.
Yeah, people have been appreciating the Bard's work for hundreds of years.
Forever. And this is one of my favorite arguments to get into with somebody when the only example for fan fiction they use is My Immortal, which we all know is terrible, and has come full circle as like a cult favorite almost, like Jupiter Ascending. I mean, did you see Jupiter Ascending?
I did.
Okay, it was really bad.
It was not that good.
No, it's not a good movie, but it's already like I feel like I'm watching the rise of a cult classic when I see Jupiter Ascending, because objectively it's just not a good movie. But there's so many moments in it that the other Shakespeare fandom and I cannot stop quoting when they come up. Like, the whole bees don't lie thing in Jupiter Ascending came up like 8 times when we read Henry V.
Yeah.
Because there was something with bees, and in the chat log, everybody was going like, bees! Bees don't lie! Bees!
Let's take a second and explain for everyone who doesn't know what Social Shakespeare is.
Yes, so Social Shakespeare is an online fandom that is currently hosted on Tumblr, although I'm going to be trying to convince them to make a switch over to a little more organized platform. Cough, NerdNest cough. And so what we do is we read a different Shakespeare play every month. And there's a Google sign-up sheet that goes out through the central Social Shakespeare Tumblr, and you can indicate which roles you want, and you indicate your time zone and what times are good for you, and then the amazing Social Shakespeare admins coordinate across at least 8 different time zones. There are literally people from all over the world who get involved in this. And then depending on the popularity of the play, there's anywhere from 3 to 7 read-throughs of that play in a given month. And we try to coordinate the play with the time of year. Like last December we read A Winter's Tale, and this October we're reading Macbeth because it's appropriately spooky.
Appropriately murder.
Yes, very spooky. And so the read-throughs themselves are conducted on Skype, and it's done on a voice call, which is great for a couple reasons, because you can fit 25 people on a voice call as opposed to only 10 on a video call. And the voice call is great for all the introverted and shy folks who do Shakespeare, because nobody is watching you. And so if you want to do a weird voice and you want to turn your character into Elvis, which I have done on many occasions, no one will care. They'll all think it's much more funny, and you don't feel any awkwardness at all. So you have the call in one window and then the chat log below, and the chat log is where everybody makes snarky comments that have to do with the play, or on actually a lot of occasions where the smart people relay to the not smart people, me, about what's going on in the play. Because if I ever have a question on some unclear language, for example, in Richard III, they use a lot of the royal we, which I don't really get, but one of the smarter people explained that to me. That's just something that kings do. I don't know. Like, they just say, because Richard III is always saying, like, well, and we decided to do this, and then we came down, and I'm like, who? Who? Is it him and his wife?
Army.
Who? but it's just a thing, because apparently, well, I don't know, is Shakespeare Elizabethan?
Yes.
Yeah. So apparently, like, Elizabethan monarchs would, or from even further back, would refer to themselves as a we, because they were speaking on behalf of themselves and God.
Pretentious, but
would that we all could do that.
What's also really interesting in a lot of the chat logs too is I'm pretty new to this social Shakespeare fandom myself, but that there's such a wealth of information from different perspectives throughout the fandom. So people have done, many different interpretations of Shakespeare's plays, and whether that's an all-female cast, a modern interpretation, there's just so many different ways to interpret the Bard, and hearing the different ways that people have either participated in or viewed different Shakespeare plays is really exciting and really enhances the meaning that you get from reading through these plays.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's so many different adaptations of Shakespeare that I never would have known about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if you've heard of the Smooth-Faced Gentleman.
No.
It's an all-female Shakespeare company.
Oh, wow.
That goes around and does things, and the most recent one I heard about was Titus Andronicus.
Ooh.
Yeah. And they used paintbrushes with red paint on them instead of knives. And so whenever someone was dismembered, which is frequently in Titus Andronicus.
Spoilers.
They just painted across, and so the whole stage just ends up being like a ton of red paint, and it's all women.
That's really cool.
Which is so exciting to watch. And I love it so much, because it reminds me that, like, fandom is not, it's not a new thing.
Yes.
It's not new to be really emotionally attached to your favorite characters. And it's not new to have a play give you all the feels. And it's not new to feel so attached to it that you do something with it in real life. Like, I don't know, she's the man.
Live on forever, she's the man.
Yes, or 10 Things I Hate About You. Or any of Kenneth Branagh's super strange adaptations of Shakespeare that for some reason will take place in Japan, because why not?
I guess you can. Because with Shakespeare, you literally can do whatever you want.
So if anyone ever gets on your back for writing fan fiction or for reading fan fiction, tell them people have been doing it for literally centuries.
Yes.
I mean, Romeo and Juliet is fan fiction, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Of a super old, what was it? Like, where did he get it from? It's an Italian thing. It's from like an old Italian folktale.
I thought he was doing it from Tristan and Isolde, which is even older.
Probably,
but it's the same. It's the same story.
Yeah. So even Shakespeare wrote fan fiction.
Yes. But there's something just really special about taking something that you love so much and just needing to create more content with it. And it's very cool to see that it's not a new thing, like you were saying, that Shakespeare fans have been doing it for forever.
For centuries, and it'll always be relevant. That's why I love him so much.
Yeah, and that's something else that's really interesting about Shakespeare, is that it just proves how incredibly talented he was, that to this day, 2015, we're still reading and interpreting his plays, and every time we're getting different takes, different ideas about them, and that they continue to evolve, and they just keep on giving.
It just gets better every time. I mean, you can't say the same for other, like, still really famous and still really important playwrights. I mean, I love Streetcar Named Desire as much as the next person, but that's so firmly entrenched in its time.
I was going to say the same. Tennessee Williams
Yeah.
was a writer about exactly the zeitgeist that he lived in, and he painted such a perfect
Yeah.
portrait of it. but you have to interpret his plays through the time in which they were written.
And you don't always have to do that with Shakespeare, and it's just so easily transposed into the modern day or whatever time period you want, or in space if you feel like it. I mean, who cares? Shakespeare certainly didn't. And there's always new stuff. Like I went to see As You Like It at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts on Friday, and they made some really interesting choices with the play that I actually wanted to talk to you about. Because so Orlando and his whole family, like the Duke and everything, were black, and then the rest of the cast was white.
Interesting.
And so that must have been deliberate. And so it made like the scene where Orlando does his wrestling match and Rosalind's like, oh my gosh, like we all would be. Side note, Rosalind gets me because at one point she's my favorite. So she's like the Hamlet of female Shakespeare characters. I mean, she has the most lines. She's arguably one of the most empowered, except perhaps Juliet. And she's just one of Shakespeare's most complex female characters, and I'm obsessed with her. So at one point, when she's talking to Celia, her cousin, because Celia's just seen Orlando for some plot references, and she's like, oh my gosh, Rosalind, guess who's in the forest? And Rosalind's like, oh my gosh, who? And so she and Celia have this fantastic back and forth where Celia's just teasing her. Rosalind is pretty sure she knows it's Orlando, but she wants the confirmation. And Rosalind literally asked Celia at one point, is his chin worthy of a beard? And I was like, oh my gosh, someone understands me and beards. Oh my gosh. So Rosalind is they. That's the conclusion.
Absolutely.
But so there's this initial scene where she falls in love with Orlando, where he's wrestling with someone else, and the Duke, who's the Duke that's currently in power, like he's the Duke that has usurped Rosalind's father and kicks him out into the forest to go live a Robin Hood life. He has like a chief wrestler who is also black. And so it's it's Orlando and this chief wrestler who do this original wrestling match. And when I read the play with social Shakespeare, I didn't think anything of it. I was just like, oh, those Elizabethans, they love wrestling, whatever. But it was just, I don't know, that seemed very deliberate to me. To have the white people watching the not white people do the wrestling. So it just kind of harkened back to Django. Have you seen that movie?
Yes.
Yeah, with like, what is it called? Mandingo fighting?
That sounds right, but I wouldn't quote either of us on this.
No, something along those lines anyways. But it was just it's a deliberate racial divide in Django Unchained, where it's, at the time, the slaves who were doing the wrestling, and the white people were not because they were above all that. And it seemed very on purpose to me that they made Orlando and the chief wrestler both black. But then there wasn't like an added element of, oh, Rosalind and Orlando kind of being a subversive pair.
Okay.
Because Celia and Rosalind didn't seem to really care, but there was still clearly a lot of animosity between the usurping Duke and Orlando's family, and like Sir Roland Dubois, who's Orlando's father. So there's all this tension between them that exists in the original play, but there's just like this added racial element to it in this particular interpretation.
Yeah, that's something so interesting that you can still add different elements based and never stray away from the text.
Because it was still there in the text, but I mean, Shakespeare doesn't specify often the race of his characters.
You know, Othello aside.
Right, that's the only one who's really specific, and if there's ever an Othello production with a not black Othello, don't go see it, kids, because it's not worth it.
They said no to Shakespeare, and you don't say no to Willie Shakes when he calls upon you.
No. But other than that, I mean, it's not specified whether Orlando's white or not.
And I think like you can make some interesting distinctions like that, where things are never specified in the text. And then what I like a lot in a lot of Shakespeare productions is modern updates on, so for example, when I did Macbeth, it was, instead of ravens sending things, it was through text. And so all of these messages went through people's phones. So the cast all had phones on them.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting because I thought it sort of played off some of those same themes that were in Macbeth about the miscommunication and the uncertainty of what other people are thinking and not knowing where you stand in other people's sights. And then to do that through text was just perfect for the modern audience because so often we have these text conversations that we don't really know the tone that the other person has. And so I thought to add that to Shakespeare and particularly to Macbeth was a really interesting production choice.
Yeah. Ooh, that is really cool. And it still maintains the universal theme, but with a modern context.
Love those universal themes with modern contexts.
That's my favorite. Oh man. I saw a production of Timon of Athens while I was in York in the north of England on study abroad last year. And Timon of Athens is a really interesting show of Shakespeare's because it's it's kind of disorganized as his plays go, and very frequently directors will cut certain parts of it out because the ending apparently doesn't really make sense. And the ending of Timon was not in this particular show. They cut it off. So the brief plot summary is that Timon is a wealthy guy, I believe in Greece. Don't quote me on that, it might be a different location. But he's just a wealthy guy in some wealthy society. And he has a lot of friends that he brings over to his house for parties. And he's very generous to his friends, always gets his friends out of scrapes. And they are constantly sucking up to him so that they can get more out of him. And there's an old sage woman who, well, she may be a man in the original one, but in this particular production she was a woman. And I don't remember her name, but she's always telling Timon, like, your friends are only in it for your wealth. Like, they're only here for you because you can give them things, and the minute you fall out of this wealth, they're going to abandon you. And she ends up being right. As soon as Timon falls on hard times and he needs help from his friends, none of his friends give him help, and so he escapes to the caves outside of town and then basically dies alone and destitute at the end of the play. And so it's just such an interesting play because it's the only one where romantic love does not figure into it at all.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to watch because the people who did this show in England did it at the time of the elections, of the 2015 elections.
Oh, okay.
So there was a lot to be said there about current British attitudes about their politicians. I mean, nobody's really outrightly trusted politicians for a long time, I don't think. I mean, we make do with the systems we have, but I don't know that there would be a whole lot of people going like, well, of course there are politicians in the world who are completely honorable, and none of them are in it just for the money or the power. I don't really think that's a thing that's been around for a long time.
We live in a post-House of Cards world.
Yeah, true. Appropriate reference is appropriate. So it's just interesting to see this production with relation to current British society, I guess, and to see that very rare Shakespeare play that wasn't about romantic love, and to have one that was just explicitly about friendship.
Yeah.
But by that same vein, it definitely wasn't one of his better ones.
Yeah, Shakespeare wrote what he wrote well about better than anyone else I've ever written.
Yeah.
Or I've read that they have written.
Yeah.
I think that he understands those themes of tragic love.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue better than any other playwright. Even though
I think so.
The ideas are not his, they're not original to him.
No.
Those themes are as ancient as time. Mm-hmm. The way in which he interprets them are so unique.
Yeah. So it's obvious when you listen to the language of Timon of Athens that he didn't feel as passionately about it as he did about Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
But it's still an interesting one, and it's this type of thing that almost makes me wish I got into history, because I want to know what was going on in his life when he wrote Timon of Athens. And,
Yeah.
well, obviously it's in Greece, it's Timon of Athens. Good Lord! Okay, well, that's okay. This is a good realization to have. Yeah. But one of his more underappreciated plays, and to some extent for good reason. I mean, the blank verse is not nearly as immaculate as it is in Romeo and Juliet. There's
Talk about blank verse, though. Wow. So beautiful.
Yeah.
Like some of those shared couplets, we've independently geeked out about this, but the perfection of the shared sonnets in that play, just unparalleled. And it's not easy to do, because you read somebody like, Cervantes, and you read it in Spanish, like the iambic pentameter, it's easier to produce based on just the cadence of the language. But in the English language, to create such perfect poetry that falls into place and sounds so natural while still maintaining all of the force and the meaning behind it, it's just so much talent.
It changed my life.
Yeah.
When I realized that that Romeo and Juliet's first lines to each other are a perfect sonnet. Like, if there was ever a reason to have an OTP, it would be because their first lines together are a perfect sonnet.
Yeah, talk about your OTP being canon from day one.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, if you watch Ben Crystal talk about this, he just breaks it down and is like, I mean, can you imagine? Most of your parents, if they, British parents, because we don't really have a whole lot of pubs here, especially in Colorado, and if they are, they're poor imitations of the real thing. Ben Crystal, he's a famous linguist and works at the Globe Theatre in London, and he's like, well, most of your parents will have probably gone up to each other in the bar and been like, hey, sweets, can I buy you a pint? And it's just not, most of our first lines to our significant others are gonna be so awkward and uncomfortable and not polished. And I mean, love at first sight is a trope we allow for in fiction, especially in Shakespeare, even though depending on who you are, it may not be a thing in real life. But it's definitely a thing in Shakespeare, and what better way to communicate that than through literally a perfect sonnet. There's no line out of place. There's not a single syllable out of place. And there's very few lines in Romeo and Juliet itself that are not in perfect iambic pentameter. It's really astonishing.
Shakespeare was a true genius. People ask about the geniuses of the world, and I always count him near the top, if not at the top for me. Just to have that command over language is just breathtaking.
Yeah.
Especially in a world where we see how difficult it is even just to navigate through the world of chat speak. just to create, we're always trying to create new meaning, to fill in these gaps in the things that we speak about that we don't have words for. We're trying to create new words. That Shakespeare not only created new words when he just didn't have something that he needed, but he used words that were already there in revolutionary ways. He helped create the English language that we use today.
Oh my gosh, and I'll occasionally see text posts that go around on Tumblr that are like, when you talk to me in iambic pentameter, it makes my heart beat real fast. And there was a comment after it that just encapsulated everything that I've grown to love and to feel about Shakespeare ever since I was involved in social Shakespeare. Because that's the thing about this online community, is that it's full of people who do this for a living. I mean, there's a handful of Shakespeare teachers and performers that are involved in this particular online fandom, and they tell you these things during the play. So not only do you have a great time reading the play and being goofy while you're reading it, you also learn a lot of really important stuff.
Yeah.
And iambic pentameter is literally written to be in sync with your heartbeat. And that's just so important to me and so amazing. And that's how you know when an actor is really understanding their lines and is really feeling the lines as they're meant to be felt. And when they're delivered so easily that you can't really hear the da-dum, da-dum, da-dum of the pentameter, but it's still there, like that's when it hits you right in the feels.
Oh.
Like that's when you know it's being done well.
Because you have a physical connection to the words.
Mm-hmm.
That you are connected through the very most base part of you, the thing that you cannot control, is being put up there in front of you, and there's a definite connection to that. There's no way to get around it, to escape that.
This is the biggest, current day misunderstanding of Shakespeare that I want that I just want everybody to understand is that Shakespeare is the original, well, not the original, but one of the original fandoms that gave people all the feels.
Yes.
Like, people would have, they really wanted sequels to certain plays of Shakespeare's. Like, Love's Labour's Lost is this really bittersweet comedy that, like, just gets me.
Sticks the knife right in and then twists it.
Doesn't take it out. And everybody wanted a sequel to Love's Labour's Lost because they're like, what the hell? This is not an okay way to end a play.
That was not the ending that should have been.
You gave me 4 beautiful OTPs and then you took them away.
Yeah.
This is terrible. Why did you do this? And so there's a lot of speculation that Much Ado About Nothing is the sequel to Love's Labour's Lost. Which you can a little bit see. There's definitely missing characters. And there are further rumors that Love's Labour's 1 is a real play that we just haven't found. And
one can always hope.
There can be hope. So when the Royal Shakespeare Company did a production of Love's Labour's Lost, they did a dual thing, and I went to watch a lot of these National Theatre simulcasts into movie theaters because I didn't have the money to go to Stratford-upon-Avon and actually go and watch them because it's really expensive to stay in the south of England. But they did Love's Labour's Lost, which I went to see for the first time, and I didn't know about the twist at the end. So I cried a lot in the theater, and all these old people are like, what is wrong with her? I was like, I haven't seen this before, and I'm so upset. And so
because it just lures you in.
Yes!
You really believe, you really think it's going to be a comedy.
Yes! Well, and this is something that I think we've lost when it comes to Romeo and Juliet.
Yes, couldn't agree more.
And it's a lot like Star Wars, right? I mean, back when Star Wars was coming out, people didn't know the Luke, I am your father. Like, that was a big surprise.
Yeah.
But we all know about that because Star Wars is such a cultural icon. And so is Romeo and Juliet. And that speaks a lot to Shakespeare's prowess and how universal that type of story is for us. So it's not really a bad thing, but I just think it's important to remember that early audiences would have seen Romeo and Juliet and been like, what the hell, this was supposed to be a comedy.
Because it reads like a comedy.
Yeah.
And it's funny and it's witty and there's this back and forth and there's all this interest, and then we all know the ending. We know what's going to happen, but if you were to read it ignorant of the ending, there's not a lot of foreshadowing to where it's headed.
Not a ton, and there's just a real element of surprise in it, and it has the love at first sight that you get in Much Ado About Nothing, and it has all of the adorable courtship in the beginning, and you just think it's all going to turn out really well. I mean, especially the sonnet at the beginning. There is no other Shakespearean OTP that does that. And that just is a lot of why I love Romeo and Juliet to begin with. But it's such a complicated play because I really wouldn't class it as a tragedy. Not now that I've learned about it. I mean, it's Love's Labour's Lost and Romeo and Juliet kind of defy the traditional categories that Shakespeare's plays were put in.
Mm-hmm.
Because they just start out one way and end another way. And they
should almost have their own category.
They really should, because they're both just really similar, and I think it's fun to put yourself in the shoes of his early audiences, which is part of the merit of expanding your own knowledge of the Shakespeare canon. I mean, I went to see Love's Labour's Lost on a whim, and then my heart was crushed. I should have expected something with a title of Love's Labour's Lost.
In retrospect.
I should have expected it to not end well. But when the lady who was hosting the National Theatre event was like, Shakespeare's bittersweet comedy, I was like, whatever.
Bittersweet? What?
That can't mean anything that bad. I mean, maybe they have some bumps along the road, but we're headed towards that happy ending, am I right? No, I was not right.
Nope.
I was very wrong. And I paid the price.
The hefty emotional price.
In feels.
That all Shakespeare fans are due to pay.
Yeah. There is only pain. I can think of 2 OTPs that work out in the Shakespeare verse. Rosalind and Orlando and Beatrice and Benedict.
I was going to say Beatrice and Benedict for sure, my Shakespeare OTP, and
yep.
I'm lucky because I'm so emotionally invested in them, and however many years later, I can't change anything, so thank heavens that they work out.
And they work out.
But that is just such a naughty play. There's just so much that goes on in that play. you can talk about crass humor, and you can watch, Anchorman, and you can enjoy those, but Much Ado About Nothing, even the title is a naughty pun. Like,
Yes.
You can't get enough of that play.
It's just so dirty. I mean, I went to see As You Like It, and there were a ton of really obvious dick jokes that I laughed very loudly and probably pretty obnoxiously at because I hadn't heard them in a little while. I mean, Orlando, at the very beginning, like after he meets Rosalind, so in this particular interpretation, Orlando was very cute and kind of like hands behind his back going like about Rosalind. And at the end, he goes, I can't say anything, and then while I'm standing up, or he says something about standing up. And he meets Rosalind, and I was like, seriously? You literally tell us all that your first moment with Rosalind is a boner. And like...
That is Shakespeare. That is the genius of the Shakespeare and his dick jokes.
Like, this is such a big part of appreciating Shakespeare. And
It really is.
Two of my friends, when we left, they were like, well, geez, Faith, you really like those dick jokes. And I was like, yeah, so did Shakespeare. So I don't understand why you're giving me like the eyebrow, because Shakespeare's not highbrow.
No, Shakespeare was made for general consumption and general enjoyment too. There are some base jokes in it.
Yes.
And they're just as brilliant as the shared sonnet.
Yes. And you don't have to pick one or the other.
Agreed.
You don't have to just laugh at the dick jokes or just swoon over Hamlet's soliloquies. Like, there's
You
room.
can do both.
Yes. There's room for brilliance and dirtiness, and Shakespeare does both. Because he knows that the real world is like that.
Yeah.
Bless him.
Bless. Well, thanks so much for tuning in with us this week. Check in another 2 weeks and we'll have something great for you. And thanks so much, Faith, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.